I don't regret it. That was the first thing she said when I confronted her. No pause. No shaking voice. No attempt to deny anything. Just a calm statement, like she was confirming the weather. I stood there waiting for something. Panic, tears, guilt. But she looked at me with empty patience. Almost bored. It happened, she added. I felt nothing. And I'm not sorry. My chest tightened. I asked her how long. She shrugged. Long enough. You didn't notice because you didn't want to. The way she said it made it clear she wasn't confessing. She was correcting me. I asked if she understood what she'd done to us. She tilted her head slightly and said, "You're overreacting. This doesn't have to be dramatic." That's when it hit me. Not the cheating, the absence of guilt. The complete lack of shame. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't afraid of consequences. She spoke like someone who had already emotionally buried the marriage and moved on. In that moment, standing in front of her calm indifference, I finally understood something terrifying. The marriage wasn't ending. It had already ended, and she felt nothing about it. Before all of this, I would have sworn our marriage was solid. Not perfect, but real. We weren't the couple who fought constantly or lived in chaos. We talked. We planned. We showed up for each other in small, ordinary ways that felt permanent. I trusted her without hesitation. There was no paranoia, no checking phones, no suspicion. I believed we were on the same side, facing the world together. When something went wrong, we handled it as a team. Or at least, that's what I thought at the time. Looking back, what defined our marriage wasn't passion or drama. It was stability. I felt chosen. I felt like I mattered. I believed that if either of us was hurting, the other would care. That belief is what makes everything that followed so hard to process. I didn't know then that stability can hide decay. That silence can be mistaken for peace. That someone can stay physically present while emotionally disconnecting piece by piece. At the time, I thought we were building a life. In reality, she was already stepping away from it. The changes didn't arrive loudly. They slipped in quietly, almost politely, which is why I ignored them. Nothing obvious enough to accuse, nothing dramatic enough to confront. Just small shifts that made me feel slightly off, then guilty for even noticing. She stopped asking my opinion on things that used to matter to both of us. Decisions were made, plans were set, and I was informed afterward. When I pointed it out, she smiled and said, "It's not a big deal." So I told myself it wasn't. Her tone changed first. Not cruel, just distant. Conversations felt shorter, less curious. She listened, but not to understand, only long enough to respond. And her responses were efficient, almost rehearsed, like she was managing me rather than connecting with me. When I tried to talk about how disconnected I felt, she dismissed it calmly. "You're overthinking," she said. "Nothing's wrong." And somehow, her certainty made my doubt feel irrational. I started adjusting, speaking less, questioning myself more, convincing myself that the distance was normal, temporary, my fault. What I didn't realize was that these subtle changes weren't random. They were the early signs of someone slowly checking out, while I was still fully invested. The red flags were there, but I kept folding them into excuses. Every time something felt wrong, I found a reason to smooth it over, to make it harmless in my head. I didn't want conflict. I didn't want to believe what my instincts were quietly warning me about. She became protective of her time in a way she never had before. Late evenings, sudden errands, vague explanations that didn't quite line up. When I asked simple questions, she answered calmly but vaguely, as if details were unnecessary. "Why are you interrogating me?" she'd say, and I'd immediately feel guilty. Her phone was always nearby, not hidden, just present, face down, locked. If I noticed, she'd sigh and say, "You're being insecure." So I told myself I was. Even the emotional distance had an explanation ready-made. "I'm just tired. Work's been stressful. I need space." All reasonable, all believable, and all perfectly timed to keep me quiet. Looking back, what hurts most isn't that I missed the signs. It's that I saw them and chose to reinterpret them in her favor. I kept explaining away behavior that should have made me stop and ask harder questions. I wasn't blind. I was loyal, and that loyalty made it easier for her to cross lines without resistance. The first real moment wasn't dramatic. There was no argument, no discovery, no proof. Just a sentence that landed wrong and stayed there. I told her I felt distant from her. Not accusing, not emotional, just honest. She didn't get defensive. She didn't comfort me either. She looked at me for a second, then said, "You're making this bigger than it is. You always do that." The way she said it mattered. Calm, certain, final. Like my feelings were a flaw she had already diagnosed. I tried to explain what I meant, but she cut me off gently. "This is exactly what I mean," she said. "You turn everything into an issue." There was no curiosity in her voice. No interest in understanding me. Just correction. That was the first time I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, unease. Like I had stepped slightly out of alignment with someone who used to be on my side. I remember thinking, why do I feel embarrassed for saying how I feel? I dropped it after that. Told myself I was being sensitive. But the feeling didn't go away. It settled in quietly, like a warning I didn't yet have words for. That was the moment something broke. Not loudly, but enough to let the cold in. After that conversation, the shift became easier to see, once I stopped pretending it wasn't happening. She didn't argue with me anymore. She corrected me. Calmly. Casually. Like someone managing a problem rather than talking to a partner. If I questioned her tone or distance, she'd respond with logic instead of empathy. "You're being emotional." That's not what I said. "You're reading into things." Each sentence was delivered evenly, without heat, which somehow made them harder to challenge. She stopped including me in her inner world. Stories came without details. Plans came already decided. When I tried to engage, she'd listen politely, then redirect the conversation back to herself or end it altogether. It felt like my role had quietly changed, from partner to background. Affection became inconsistent. Not absent, just hollow. Quick gestures, surface-level intimacy, nothing that lingered. When I noticed, she acted confused. "We're fine," she said. "You're imagining problems." What stood out most was the confidence. She wasn't hiding anything emotionally. She behaved like someone who no longer felt accountable to how I felt. Like she had already moved past the idea that my reactions mattered. That's when I realized this wasn't a phase. It was a reordering, and I was no longer at the center of her world. The lies weren't dramatic. That's what made them so confusing. They were small, almost lazy. Explanations that technically answered questions, but never actually made sense when placed next to each other. She'd say she was exhausted from work, yet somehow had energy for long evenings out. She claimed she needed space, but became irritated when I took emotional distance myself. She said nothing was wrong, while everything about her behavior said otherwise. When I pointed out contradictions, she didn't panic. She didn't stumble. She looked at me like I was missing something obvious. "Why are you keeping track of everything?" she asked. "That's not healthy." Suddenly, the focus wasn't on her story, it was on my reaction. Her answers were vague by design. Just enough detail to sound truthful, never enough to be questioned. And when I pressed for clarity, she framed it as mistrust. "I've told you the truth," she said. "If you don't accept that, that's on you." I remember thinking how strange it felt to argue without facts. Nothing I could prove, nothing I could pin down. Just a growing sense that reality was being edited in real time. The lies didn't collapse because they were clever. They survived because I wanted to believe her. The emotional distance didn't arrive suddenly. It crept in quietly, disguised as normal life. Conversations became shorter. Eye contact disappeared. Touch felt optional, sometimes inconvenient. She stopped sharing her thoughts. When I asked how her day was, I got summaries instead of feelings. Fine. Busy. Same as always. Anything deeper seemed to annoy her. It was like I was interrupting something invisible whenever I tried to connect. I started noticing how present she was with everyone except me. She laughed more at her phone than she did with me. Her attention felt outsourced. Even when we sat on the same couch, it felt like she was somewhere else. Already gone, just not physically yet. What hurt most wasn't the silence. It was the absence of curiosity. She no longer asked about me. My stress, my thoughts, my presence, all of it faded into background noise. I became predictable, safe, ignorable. At the time, I told myself this was just a phase, that marriages go through quiet stretches. But looking back, I see it clearly now. The affair didn't start with sex. It started when I stopped matching emotionally, and she felt nothing about that. I didn't discover the cheating in a dramatic way. No screaming, no scene. Just a quiet moment that cracked everything open. Her phone buzzed while she was in the shower. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious enough for that yet. I just glanced at the screen out of reflex and saw a name I didn't recognize followed by a message that didn't belong in a marriage. I missed last night. My chest tightened instantly. That cold, sinking feeling hit before my brain could even process it. I unlocked the phone with a code I'd known for years, and suddenly I was standing in a version of my life that wasn't mine anymore. There were weeks of messages, inside jokes, compliments she hadn't given me in months, plans that didn't include me, emotional intimacy carefully built in the space where our marriage used to be. What stunned me wasn't just that she cheated. It was how comfortable it all looked. No panic, no secrecy anymore, just routine. In that moment, I realized something brutal. This wasn't a mistake she fell into. This was a life she had already chosen, without me. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I had to confront her, to hear it from her own mouth, to see if there was even a shred of remorse. I asked her, voice shaking, "Is it true? Are you seeing him?" She looked at me calmly, like I'd asked the most obvious question in the world. "Yes," she said. Just that. No hesitation, no shame. I felt my chest tighten. "How long?" I demanded. "Long enough," she replied, tilting her head slightly. "You didn't notice because you didn't pay attention. It's not my fault." I tried to process her words, tried to find the anger, the guilt, the apology, anything. But she didn't offer any. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't backtrack. She spoke as if stating facts, not committing betrayal. "When I'm honest about what I need," she added, "you act like it's a crime. You're overreacting." I realized then, in that moment of icy clarity, that this wasn't just infidelity. It was her asserting her entitlement. She had already decided what she deserved, and my pain was irrelevant. The confrontation ended not with resolution, but with the stark truth. My marriage had ended long before I knew, and she felt nothing about it. I kept looking for it, the flicker of guilt, a tear, a stumble in her voice. Anything to show she understood the damage she had done. But it never came. She didn't hesitate. She didn't waver. She didn't even look conflicted. Instead, she leaned back, arms crossed, calm as ever. "Why would I feel guilty?" she asked. I acted on what I needed. I'm being honest. That's more than most people ever are. I told her she had broken everything, that she had destroyed the trust and love we shared. She just shrugged lightly, almost bored. "The marriage was already broken emotionally," she said. "You just didn't see it. I deserved what I took, and I did it. I'm not a villain for claiming my own life." Her lack of guilt was suffocating. Not only did she cheat, but she did it convinced she was morally justified. When I tried to show her the pain she'd caused, she dismissed it with the calm certainty of someone who believed her actions were irrelevant to anyone else. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was entitlement masquerading as truth. And the realization hit me like ice. There was no remorse to hope for, no apology to receive. Her betrayal was complete, and she felt nothing. After hearing her words, something inside me finally broke. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness, at least not at first. It was a raw, hollow emptiness, the kind that leaves you shaking without sound. I replayed every memory, every subtle change I had ignored, every lie I had rationalized, every moment I had excused her behavior. It all stacked up, heavy and suffocating, until I could no longer hold it inside. I felt powerless, humiliated, foolish for trusting someone who had been emotionally gone long before I even realized it. My chest ached, my head spun. It was as if the ground beneath me had disappeared, leaving only a pit of betrayal and disbelief. I had loved someone who saw me as secondary, someone who prioritized her entitlement over the person she promised to cherish. The collapse wasn't sudden. It had been building for months, maybe years, and now it came in full force. I sat in silence, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what had happened. And in that crushing emptiness, a new thought emerged. I couldn't keep chasing someone who had already left emotionally. I had to survive this. Not for her, but for myself. It hit me suddenly, like a punch I'd been bracing for without realizing it. I finally understood. I had spent months, no, years, searching for signs of remorse, looking for cracks in her calm, for some flicker of shame. I kept hoping she'd apologize, that she'd regret, that she'd see the destruction she caused. But the truth was brutal. She wasn't capable of it. She didn't see herself as wrong. She didn't feel guilty. She didn't care. And that was the part one had never allowed myself to truly see. In that instant, clarity replaced the fog of denial. The subtle changes, the lies, the emotional distance, it all made sense now. I had been mourning a marriage that only existed in my mind. She had emotionally checked out long before I discovered the affair, and my efforts to fix or salvage it had been meaningless. I understood finally what I couldn't deny. Cheating without guilt is emotional annihilation. The betrayal wasn't just in the act, it was in the absence of remorse. And no apology, no explanation, no reasoning could ever change that. For the first time, I saw it clearly. This marriage was over. Not because of the affair alone, but because she had already removed herself from it, and she felt absolutely nothing about it. The decision didn't come with fanfare. It came quietly, almost painfully, as I realized I had been giving my energy to someone who no longer cared. Every question I asked, every attempt to express my pain, every plea for acknowledgement, it was all meaningless to her. I stopped arguing. I stopped pleading. I stopped hoping she would feel remorse or understand my perspective. Not because I forgave her, not because I accepted the betrayal, but because I finally accepted a truth I had avoided for too long. Nothing I could do would change her. For the first time in months, I chose myself. I matched her distance, not out of anger, but out of survival. I stopped chasing approval, stopped defending my feelings, stopped clinging to a marriage that existed only in my head. It was terrifying at first. I felt exposed, guilty for stepping back, ashamed for letting go. But slowly, relief seeped in. I was no longer investing in someone who had already decided she was entitled to disregard me, my love, and my trust. This wasn't about winning or punishing her. It was about reclaiming my dignity. Letting go wasn't victory, it was sanity. And in that moment, I realized self-respect begins when you stop begging someone to care. Once I stopped chasing, clarity came like a cold, sharp light. The fog lifted, and I finally saw the marriage for what it truly was. Hollow, one-sided, and built entirely on my effort and denial. Love without reciprocity isn't love, it's surrender. And I had been surrendering for too long. She didn't reach out. She didn't apologize. She didn't try to explain or repair anything. Her silence confirmed what I had long suspected. She had already elevated herself above me emotionally, morally, and mentally. Nothing I could do would ever change that. Distance wasn't about punishing her. Detachment wasn't bitterness. It was survival. I allowed myself to feel the pain fully, without rationalizations or excuses. I stopped defending her in my own mind. I stopped pretending she might care about the damage she caused. I accepted reality. In that quiet, painful space, I realized the most important lesson. When someone cheats and feels entitled or unremorseful, believe them. Remorse matters more than explanations. Love without empathy is emotional abandonment. Self-respect begins the moment you stop begging someone to care. Cheating hurts. Cheating without guilt and with entitlement is the final betrayal.